Hey everybody, welcome to the Friday edition of the Daily Friend Weekly Roundup. That's right, this is your weekly roundup of all things that made the news, opinion, and analysis cycle of the Daily Friend. Remember, you can find all our writing, news and analysis and our writers on the Daily Friend website. That's dailyfriend.co.za. And it's been a bit of a quiet week in a sense because of the holiday we had on Tuesday. And I hope you guys enjoyed Shaga's Day, or I'm sorry, Heritage Day, or I'm sorry, Bride Day. Whatever iteration you chose, I hope you enjoyed it. I know I did. It was a welcome rest. Guys, it's a Friday and I want us to have a conversation on some of the things that really did make the news cycle, stuff that we also believe, as I introduced just shortly our panel, that you should be watching out as we head into the new week. The Institute of Race Relations, who of course are our partner in the show, are going to be launching quite a few interesting campaigns that I think you need to be firstly aware of and pay attention to the arguments they use so that you can also marshal them in your day-to-day conversation. Speaking about day-to-day conversations, welcome to my panel of guests here on the show. I'm going to start at the far end, of course, a perhaps new face that you are seeing, a chap who's been interning here at the Institute of Race Relations, Mr. Stephan Kersop. I hope I said that properly.
Yes,
Kersop.
that is correct.
Stephan, of course, is a math and statistics guru. So we'll have a chat with him. He wrote in the Daily Friend this week, so we'll have a chat to him about the piece he put together. Another face, which is actually quite a familiar face for those of you who watch my other show, Blacks Only on the Big Liberty Show, Mr. Mpiyakhe Dhlamini, who is from the Free Market Foundation. He is a writer and an analyst there. Mpiyakhe, welcome to the show. How are you doing?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
Fantastic. I say I caught you off guard there. Of course, last but not least, a face who I think you guys know quite well on this show, definitely a regular, a chap who is a very sort of has a very quiet approach to how he sort of deals with things, but a very reasonable and rational individual, Mr. Nic Lorimer. Nicholas, brother man, how are you doing?
That's that stuff that you just said is big if true.
Well, there you go. Chaps, let's jump straight into the news week. Let me start at the top because it was going to be perhaps a massive cluster mess had it happened today. What is now stymied bank protest or bank strike, whole bunch of bank employees wanted to go on strike. Numerous reasons, but some of the bigger ones cited by the union COSATU is the idea of the retrenchments being cited by the sector. And of course, associated with that in terms of the argument they made that I picked up in the news cycle is this idea that they would have been embarking on the strike because of the highly technical environment that banking sector is becoming, the innovative environment, which is making certain jobs redundant in the banking sector. I'm going to begin with you, Nicholas, because obviously with the courts having said, "Hey man, chill on the strike," the unions have to go back to the drawing board now, don't they?
Yeah, no, they're going to have to come up with a new approach. I suspect they'll go back to this shortly. They'll probably try again once they get the opportunity. But a lot of the concerns raised by the union, which is we need upskilling of workers to prepare for the dreaded fourth industrial revolution.
We said the term. I was hoping you would avoid it, but yeah.
But no, it was they used the term, not me. And the core of this issue, for me at least, is that we wouldn't have to fear the march of technological process so much if our education system worked better. We were just talking before the show, and I can't remember who brought it up, but the number of kids passing maths with 50% or more in our schools is like about 5% who start in grade 1 and will finish matric with 50% or more in maths, which means that the throughput of workers who are kind of prepared for the new global age, which involves skills like coding and much more numeracy skills, are really, the very few of them. And this is going to seriously constrain a lot of our economic growth going forward.
And that's the reality, the cold, hard reality, really. When you only have 5 out of every 100 kids who are likely going to pass matric math with a percentage of 50% or higher, it puts paid any suggestion that somehow we can be competitive internationally in terms of the sort of science, technology, engineering, and math qualifications required to have a new generation of workers keep up with the pace of a highly globalizing and ever increasingly technological world. And I'm looking at you two chaps because essentially you work in that, or rather you've studied and I suppose work in that area of science, technology, engineering, and math. Stephan, I want to begin with you because you did a mathematical statistics degree.
Yes.
Now, I suppose the question I'm asking is a bit of a cheeky and personal one, but it'll inform the rest of the conversation. When you decided to focus on that in your degree, did you do it because your only understanding was that, hey, I can only be a lecturer with this qualification, or did you actually understand that it opens up a wealth of career options for you?
I mean, of course, it's all the hype now, these information degrees. I chose statistics because in the applied mathematics, I feel it's one of the fastest growing and more stable career options. People are saying, the banks are getting rid of all these people, but on the back end, they are employing all these new, computer scientists and mathematicians and people to create and see trends and create models for them to stay on top of the market.
Absolutely.
So the information era, is on top of us, and degrees like mine, mathematical statistics, are the degrees that help companies to stay on top of what's happening, understand where people are going and what they want out of the market.
And it's funny you mentioned that because I knew to segue nicely into Mpiyakhe, because Mpiyakhe is a coder and very big on machine learning. I mean, this is the sort of, if you listen to the buzz language of Fourth Industrial Revolution, machine learning, this is the one area actually which is already having a tangible impact on the current world of work. Mpiyakhe, talk to us, your skill sets. I suppose the question, there'll be two questions I ask here, but let me begin in the more interesting one. What made you decide to head into coding, firstly, and your interest in machine learning, just very briefly?
So I decided to go into coding after UCT kicked me out for essentially failing my physics undergrad degree. So I went back home and just basically taught myself Python because we'd done a bit of it in like first year physics. So it was my first time being exposed to programming in my life. And so I liked it, and then I decided to do more of it. And it was always be a long-term goal of mine to work in AI. I wasn't very specific back then. Like, was it machine learning? Was I talking about optimization or whatever? But I just thought, I want to work in AI. I want to build cool stuff. And then eventually I got the chance to go attend the Explore Data Science Academy last year. Like, there's a lot of detail I'm skipping here, but last year I got the chance to attend this, and then it was so there's like what I found is that these things are very interesting, very worthwhile to study, but like obviously it's a lot of hard work, and you really can't go anywhere unless you are willing to commit and sacrifice to it. And so
Guys, I'll tell you why I'm bringing this up, and it'll segue back to our conversation about the unions. At no point do you hear unions like COSATU speak this language, the idea of being at the forefront of advocating for education policy that strengthens these sort of skill sets, which baffles me, because surely if we're saying the world is heading in a more technologically advanced era, and I'm not going to say Fourth Industrial Revolution, I can see Nicholas looking at me going, he's going to say it. We should be hearing unions like COSATU being at the forefront of saying, hey, how about we upskill our guys in this direction, coding, machine learning, AI, this new world, if you will, of technological advancement. Nicholas, we're not hearing unions have this conversation, are we, in terms of also influencing their partners in government, ANC?
No, not really. Unions themselves are creations of the 19th century and the early Industrial Revolution. And they, especially in South Africa, have not adapted to the changing global climate. In fact, they're still stuck very much in the sort of Cold War way of looking at politics and economics. And they don't understand that the advancement of technology is something that can't really be resisted properly. I mean, they're protesting against the retrenchment of workers here, but that's really not a long-term solution. You need to start looking at ways that you can help your members adapt to a much more dynamic world where technological changes seems to be increasing its pace, and you need to come up with ways that you can respond to that marketplace as labor.
this conversation is a very broad one, and maybe as we sort of have last 2 points around it, and again, maybe to segue back to just the absolute failure of union and union bosses to, even though they have a direct line, if you will, to policymakers and politicians, they just don't leverage that influence. Let's circle back to fees must fall time. And, there's the height of the violence, the students basically making a demand for essentially their layer of tertiary education to be well-funded, essentially free. Free. At no point did you hear other voices in the sector who have a stake in the sector actually make the other argument. Say, guys, we get the university obsession, right? It might be misplaced, but we get it, right? But why are we not having a conversation about building institutions and strengthening the existing ones, like TVET colleges, to be able to provide these sort of skills at a more sort of practical, hands-on, vocational level? Mpiyakhe, as we just heard, is a coder. You don't have to go to university to learn coding. We could be devolving those skills in a very accessible way to a larger proportion of students, right? We didn't hear this conversation from the unions and even the politicians, let alone the students. Guys, should we not be advocating for a tertiary education regime in this country that places greater emphasis on building up these skills at a vocational level and giving more young people an opportunity to upskill and actually enter the world of work? I'll start with Nic and then go to Mpiyakhe.
Yeah, we should. But we also need to recognize that part of the problem here is the reason everyone wants a university degree is because you can't get anything from your matric.
Yeah.
Right? If you want to get to sort of a normal office job, you basically need a university degree because otherwise you're not going to be considered. If we had a better secondary education system, the sort of high school phase, then it would put less pressure on the universities. And if we improved our technicons, more people might be going into them. But right now, there's so few jobs, and the education you get in high school is so bad that people demand to go to university because otherwise they see a whole life of unemployment or even manual labor ahead of them, which is not attractive.
Mpiyakhe, your thoughts?
Yeah, no, this what Nick's saying now is absolutely correct. I mean, this is in South Africa. I feel like we need actually more freedom, agnostic of what kind of education that someone decides to get. Like, if you want to do art, you can go do art or not. But what I think is what I'm worried about is the constraints put on individuals in terms of not being able to choose whatever education they want. So you shouldn't be in a position where in a few years' time you can blame the government or whoever for not having made it in life. It should only be through your actions. And so this is why I think the government is missing a trick here. We probably do need more math skills, but let individuals decide, and which is currently not happening now.
And let me thank you for going in this direction, because the second part of that second bit I was saying will end off the conversation is here at the Institute of Race Relations, we've been making a strong argument for choice, exactly the very thing that Mpiyakhe is talking about, by way of education vouchers. And the 2 points that you guys made are actually very linked, because you could increase choice and you can increase the diversity, if you will, of options. But on the one hand, focusing on demand, giving the parent the ability to choose where their child gets an education. And invariably, that decision-making happens in conjunction with the child's skills and what's the word? Inclinations, if you will. And equally, what the market can provide to try and meet this demand. So if you have a situation where kids want to do your more hands-on skills, your coding, your diesel mechanic, etc., all the things that we sort of look down on, but actually the market requires much more, you can have people respond to this incentive if you empower them with vouchers. Nicholas?
Yeah, no, that's definitely true. And part of the problem, actually, with our education system is the unions themselves.
Yeah.
The South African Democratic Teachers Union, SADTU,
Absolutely.
has destroyed a huge number of state schools by basically making the teachers unaccountable to any kind of governance by either the government or the parents. If there was school choice, if parents could choose the school that they were going to with sort of a voucher system like we advocate for, then it would change the incentive. So unions would be then trying to make their schools more attractive to compete with the private schools that are perhaps less unionized. Because right now, if parents had the choice, they would not send their children to unionized schools.
Guys, I'm going to wrap that one over here, but I want us to move on to a piece that Stephan wrote this week. It's actually quite a good piece. And again, you can find all our writers, analysts, and news pieces on the Daily Friend website. That's dailyfriend.co.za. There's a nice piece here titled "The Mob Rules," and it's written by Stephan. And the opening paragraph is, high levels of unemployment, crime, corruption have pushed many South Africans over the edge as the government, time and time again, fails to meet the public's expectations. Stephan, what were you writing about here? Break it down for us in a couple of minutes.
People in South Africa are becoming desperate. They want to see tangible change, something that they can experience. And these people are not, our country is known for having a lot of people who are poor, people who are unemployed. We've hit 29% unemployment in the second quarter of this year, which is the highest it's been since 2003. So, it's shocking. And a lot of people these last 3 years have moved to protest action as their main way of showing displeasure. Since the early 2000s, the number of protest actions every year has increased more than threefold. And this just shows that people are becoming desperate and violent. So these protests start peaceful. They start with a lot of support, with the right idea. And then after a few weeks, when things aren't going as planned, and when the government are basically just ignoring them, people are turning to violence and vandalism to get the media attention and try to cause problems for those in charge, so that they feel threatened and eventually do what the mob needs to happen.
And of course, Nic, there is a long tradition in this country of violent protests, even before this democratic dispensation. In fact, it was a tactic used by a lot of the parties that were fighting against the apartheid regime, of actually, what's called ungovernability campaigns that they sort of embarked on. That culture stayed with us, didn't it?
It's very much been embedded in South Africa's way of doing things. South Africans are we as a nation, we are an unruly people, and we're difficult to govern, which is one of the reasons why this sort of very top-down, structured state approach is not going to work. Because when people don't like something, they get very upset about it, and they're not afraid to show their displeasure. So sort of culturally, that approach is really not going to work for us, because it requires a lot of violence to make it work, as the apartheid regime showed, right? They were a very centralized government.
Mpiyakhe, there's an absolute breakdown in two broad components. We've actually chatted about this before. There's the idea of the rule of law, which speaks to a society founded on law, often constitutional law, set principles, rules, and legislation, if you will, that governs our interactions as society, right? And then there's the idea of maintaining law and order, which is obviously a function of the state, depending on where you are in terms of your worldview. But essentially, broadly speaking, we give the state almost a monopoly on the use of violence through the police and essentially law enforcement. However, it seems in this country that the police have become almost absolutely hapless and useless. And we saw this in the recent spate of so-called xenophobic violence that flared up in the country, where SAPs or the police would arrive at a scene and it's sheer chaos. There's looting, there is people being beaten up, and they'd almost stand back and wait until it subsides before they then assert some form of, let's call it quasi-authority in that moment. And we have a chap online, a mutual friend of ours, Paratus, or Khadiya Nubert, who speaks of the concept of the Pelian principle, which is it the Pelian principle? Did I get that right? Essentially, the idea that the police need consent from a public to police them.
Yeah, it does sound like Robert P.
And society, or our society, just, I don't get the impression SAPs have the consent necessarily from the public that they police.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And I think another common friend of ours, Zach Mpele, has made some very strong, very good proposals on how we can reform this system, like put more power in the hands of the communities. I mean, to do things like appoint local station commanders and things like that. And so those are things I think government should be looking at seriously. But I think this speaks to the fact that institutions have never really worked for individuals in South Africa. Like if you think about it, institutions have always been used to oppress individuals. And I think this has bred this sense of frustration, this sense of people like they can't really get things they can't really exercise their freedom or their liberties. And so this is going to boil over into violence. That's how I see it anyway. And this trend of institutions not working for people continues. And I think this is why I think the biggest focus right now should be on criminal justice reform, actually reform the National Prosecuting Authority, reform the police services, but also reform legal aid, because I think this is one of the areas that's often ignored, but which is absolutely crucial for how poor people access justice, and which is crucial for us to even call ourselves a liberal democracy. So, yeah.
Nic, as we maybe look to wrap this section up, there's something also deeper in this. The Institute of Race Relations has released documents historically. In fact, we have the Broken Blue Line report, the third iteration, where we speak to some of the interventions we could put in place in order to get the law and order question right. And Mpiyakhe touches on the principles behind it. The one is, of course, placing greater accountability on the entire system and also putting power back into the hands of communities and families. I don't know if you're well versed on the suggestions, but I'll throw two or three to you and you can sort of chat about them. Mpiyakhe has raised one, the idea that at the time of local government elections, people should be able to appoint and elect their own station commander. A lot of people don't even know who that chap is. Greatly empowered community policing forums, and of course, neighborhood watches. Are these not the sort of solutions or interventions we should be moving in the direction of?
Yeah, these are all good ideas for. As you stated, a populace requires to consent to be policed, right? And right now the police have very little legitimacy because they're seen as ineffective and corrupt. So people don't trust them, and that's why people turn to things like mob violence or private security companies or whatever their other options are, or sometimes arming themselves.
Which I'm not against,
I'm not against either, but it's a response to lack of policing. Now, it's not a fix-all solution appointing your own commanders or having watches. There would be things like vigilante gangs would probably pop up, and some of them might be that. And also a lot of people would probably, as our boss France says, would elect Genghis Khan as their station commander. So in the short term, there might be some difficulty. But once people began consenting to be policed and that policing became more effective, then it would be easier to start curbing the excesses of that system and say that would be the sort of phase 2 of fixing our law and order problems. Once things are kind of settled down a bit. And once the police are accountable to people, we will see an improvement in police services.
Absolutely.
Sorry. I think it's really important what you're saying, to give people a hand in how they're being policed, and because people are currently taking it forcibly. There's been a huge increase in mob justice. SAPS has released data that said that more than 800 killings in the last year was motivated by community revenge and mob justice, which is a staggering number. And Stats SA also did a survey where they talked to people who declared that they are unsatisfied with the courts, and they said that almost, I think it's something like 46% of those people said that the criminals came off too easily in the courts. So people are feeling that the criminals are not being caught, and when they are being caught, they are not being judged fairly. And so they take things into their own hands, which become ugly and almost unconstitutional.
Guys, as we look to wrap up our conversation, I'll always do this, of course, on the Friday edition, which is, we've discussed the week that was, but what are some of the issues and news items, if you will, that people should be looking forward to in the run-up to, of course, the weekend papers and, of course, next week. Nic, I'm going to focus on you, actually, on this one, because we have some campaigns that we're going to be running as the IRR. Can I just briefly talk to us about them?
Yeah, so next week I think the submissions on the NHI are closing.
Yeah.
So you need to get in your submissions if you want to talk about the NHI and the negative effects it's going to have on South Africa's health system. I think we're also going to be talking a little bit about Tito Mbowene's paper that he asked the public for comment on. The IRR has made a submission on that, so we're going to be talking a little bit about that next week as well in the media. And those are the main things at least on my horizon for next week.
Absolutely. Guys, as I wrap up the conversation, just a quick tell people how they can find you on social media. Stephan, I don't know if you are... Okay.
I'm not.
Stephan gave us a quick
don't find
no. Mpiyakhe, how do we find you?
So my personal website is mpiyakhe dhlamini.com. The Twitter is Turing_1991. And then the Facebook is just Mpiyakhe Dhlamini.
Absolutely. Nick, how do we find you? And of course, punt your podcast that you're one half of.
Well, I'm a little bit scared of punting that podcast because Gabriel and I haven't been able to put out an episode for 2 months now. Yeah. But that's Two Crickets in a Thorn Tree, which is our podcast, which we sometimes do when Gabriel's not running off to Russia. But yeah, on social media, I tried to keep a little bit of a low profile because I think social media is a evil that is, afflicting us all with terrible calamity.
Hey man, I hear you on that.
It's the Antichrist.
Well said.
Fellas, thank you very much for joining me on this edition, of course, of the weekly roundup. Stephan, hopefully you'll be a face we see more of, but I don't know, we'll see what happens. And thank you, the viewer, I nearly said the listener. We just recorded yesterday the Liberty and Friends with Mpiyakhe Dhlamini, funny enough. Thank you, the listener, for joining us in this week's episode. And yeah, as Nicholas put it to you guys, there are a few campaigns that I want you guys to keep a sharp eye on, things that really affect your quality of life. And this is what we talk about what we mean when we talk about the battle of ideas. You need to be a part and parcel of what we do here. It's not just about us fighting on your behalf, but actually bringing you closer into the fight, and having us arm you, if you will, with the argument so that you can be well versed and you can draw the line against the ever increasingly predatory politicians that are after your quality of life, of course, your property rights, and even your basic freedoms and liberties. These are the things that we defend here at the IRR, and of course on the Daily Friend: life, liberty, and property rights. With that being said, thank you so much for your support, and a quick shout out to the Frederick Naumann Foundation, of course, are a good backer and funder, of the show, and you, of course, the ordinary viewer who is part of the Friends of the IRR crowdfunding campaign that we run here. It is the hundreds of you who donate to this channel that are keeping it going, that keep our analysts going here. And I encourage those of you who aren't maybe yet part of the Friend of the IRR campaign to join it. And how do you do that, you're wondering? Well, you can find us, of course, you can join up, and sign up by SMSing your name to 32823. A SMS will cost you R1, and terms and conditions do apply. But hey, maybe you're part of that fourth industrial revolution. I finally said it, gang. And you're like, hey, I'm tech savvy. I'm hip. Well, find us online by signing up at irr.org.za/join. And you can sign up a monthly debit order of R90, which again gets us into the fight and has us bring your voice into the echelons of power in this country. Guys, thank you so much for watching. You will find us next week, of course, in a fresh new week, every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, only here on the Daily Friend.